Welcome to the Strive 365 podcast. How are you?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm doing well. Yeah, thanks very much for the invitation. So glad to be here. I haven't seen you in a
Yeah,
little while, so it's good to finally connect, even if it's in this podcast form.
it has been a long time.
Yeah.
If we go back even a long time since you were my head coach, firstly
Yep.
through kind of our Western days, but then Canterbury United in the Men's National League in New Zealand for a couple of seasons. But beyond our coach-player relationship, we've been fortunate to employ you ultimately through my time at Coastal Spirit and spent a lot of time with you. I class you more than just a colleague, a friend, but mainly more so a mentor. So I'm really excited for this conversation because I think we can go down the mentor rabbit hole a lot and spend some
Yeah.
time looking in that
Yeah.
space. So that's kind of where this conversation might differ from others, and we'll get you down talking about the mentor role and some other pieces that you have a lot of experience in. So
Look forward to it. Yeah.
my how I start these off is kind of regaling some stories. So we'll
Hmm.
move beyond the Canterbury United days and think more around Coastal Spirit time. And
Hmm.
I'll, every afternoon around 3 or every second afternoon around 3 o'clock, see you drive into the
I
car park,
remember.
and I go,
Yeah.
"Oh no, Korouch is here early.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
going to want to have a conversation." So you'd come in and you go, "Ah, Gareth, what about confidence? Is confidence a skill, or have you thought about this?" And at the time, as a young developing professional,
Mhm.
um, I'd find those conversations really challenging and really like, oh, here we go again type thing. But not having those sort of conversations now, I really look back and treasure those moments and experience and think, man, if everybody had the luxury of having, in this case, a mentor to come and ask these not so much difficult questions, but just any questions that stimulate thinking and conversation. And we'd spend an hour here and an hour there,
Hmm.
sorts of stuff. So yeah, there were some really really fond memories, and I hold them quite dear. I'm not quite sure if can think back to those times. And did you have was any method to the madness, or was it things that were on your mind that you wanted a sounding board? How did those come about in your sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I suppose what's important to note is that even though it might have been unconscious to you, me arriving earlier, it was very conscious for myself. So usually what happens is anyone who has the fortune of having experiences, obviously older than you, come from a different generations, but have experiences, whether that is as a player, as a coach, or someone who has some knowledge of the game. You're always looking to connect with people. You talked about friendships before. There has to be a basis for some level of connection, but you're always looking for people who are open to learning. And by doing so, there was a conscious effort in that case, in that coastal spirit time, to be able to engage with you, to see whether or not those conversations interested you. And once you find someone who's willing to do the work, who's willing to invest time in upskilling or educating themselves, then usually it lends itself to that repeating itself. And then you can build a strong connection and start talking about a whole raft of things, which might be labeled mentoring, but they're more about connecting and sharing knowledge, experience, whether that be on a philosophical level, or whether that be just, some of the more mundane kind of daily conversations you might have about the game, football, coaching, parenting, the player, etc. So yeah, there was a little bit of a conscious thought from my end.
And I greatly appreciate the effort that
Yeah,
you put in, and things that you saw in me that you think this guy might be worth
yeah,
this time of my own. So for that, I
yeah,
really thank you. And kind of one of the earlier moments that I remember very clearly was we were heading into Eric Adam for a training session, and we sort of had some time, and you asked me around, what's my philosophy? And I kind of, gave a bit of a half-baked response, and you kind of listened and
yeah,
smiled and said, thank you for that. But,
yeah,
what's your philosophy? That's a whole lot of words, and it's not really your philosophy. And I said, well, I think I said, oh, to be honest, I probably need to go away and think about it. And he said, yep, good answer. Go away, think about it. I'll ask you again in a year. And sure enough, you did, and probably gave you a slightly more refined version of what I had said previously. And he said, yeah, cool. Maybe go away and think about this in this sense a little bit more. And, you never really let me off the hook as such, but in a really caring way, and kind of, listened and didn't shoot me down either. It was kind of like, yeah, here's an idea, and through my experiences and my wisdom and obviously your background, and we'll speak about the coach education piece soon, kind of wanted to keep digging deeper than the surface level responses that we quite often come across in our profession. And the people who have that greater depth of thought more than answers is kind of the people that kind of do persist longer and go further in the game. So yeah, a lot of these sort of stories that come to mind around philosophy and talk about who dictates tempo. That's a good one. And if somebody kicked off in a game of football and no one else moved, what would happen? Just these abstract ideas. I think there's a lot of moments that I try and share with the coaches I work with around not so much these concepts, but the way that these ideas can get presented, and just sort of see what their way of thinking is.
Yeah, I'll start. I'll use that example. The Eric Adam. That obviously that's the place where we delivered a significant amount of coaching. So I'll go back to the idea of asking what seems to be a relatively simple question, and the fact of what's your playing philosophy, or what's your philosophy on sport, on the game, on football in general. It's one that's commonly asked. But what I've found over the years in interacting with coaches who are working their way through a phase of learning, a phase of researching the game and trying to articulate and define their ideas, is trying to give them the best possible chance, right, of not delving into the anecdote and concentrating more on the definitions of things. Well, the mere kind of idea of what is your playing philosophy is ultimately a search of knowledge, right? If you go back to the definitions of philosophy, that's really what it is. And any subject matter, to give people the best chance of starting out, it's to identify what the definitions of some of the terms and terminologies are, and ask them whether or not they truly have an understanding of what that is. Because what that does is enables you to go away, and before you add the footballing context as a coach, before you delve into what that might not be, it gives you an opportunity to actually think about it from a wider lens, and then you're able to come back and go, well, in relation to my profession as a coach, what could it potentially mean? So, when I sent you away and said, have a think about it, it's because what initially came back was a raft of anecdotal things which you either feel as a mentee, that a mentor or someone that you trust wants to hear, versus in actual fact what authentically you feel is aligned to your, not even so much values or belief, but actually behaviors and actions is probably more valuable than those things. So hopefully that was that was the test and the ongoing test of you going away and doing the work you needed to do to be able to first define definition, come back with terminology, and then relate it directly to maybe a belief system or a value system or just actions and behaviors. So that's the journey.
Yeah, and the journey's not stopped. So if we fast forward probably say 7 years from those sort of stories, we reconnected again. I was at New Zealand Football. You're at where you are now with New Zealand Northern Football, as well as New Zealand Football in the coach ed space. And we're fortunate enough we have an office with some whiteboards, and we go again with not so much around tactics, but more around player development and player tracking and different kind of ideas I've been kind of playing around with, and I could bounce ideas off you. And we kind of have, whilst we don't have the luxury of being in person you know, today, me being in Melbourne, you've been in Auckland, we catch up when I'm back in New Zealand, and, you know, we probably speak on the phone every 6 months, and, you know, I might have a challenge, you know, I flick you a text, and we still have that ongoing connection, which I think is critical for, you know, an area that I would highly, you know, recommend, and we'll talk more about this over the next sort of half an hour or so around, you know, finding the person or people and what roles they can offer you in terms of different layers or different, you know, components of a mentoring element, be it a program, or be it an individual, be it a, you know, a couple of people, and, you know, maybe they serve different sort of functions, they have different strengths that they can approach you in a different way as well. But before we get too caught up in that, just for the audience's sake, the majority of these conversations, you know, there's an element of being an ex-player, coach, or parent. So just to kind of not gloss over your CV, but, you know, you've also achieved some things as a player and as a coach, and now as an administrator. So maybe let's just, you know, give us the highlight packages of these three, so people listening can kind of go, oh yeah, this guy, you know, has some depth behind his experiences. So start us off as a player, you know, back in New Zealand in the, I won't say the decade, but that moved quite quickly overseas.
Yeah, it did. So I actually arrived in New Zealand. I wasn't born in New Zealand. I was born in Iran, and I moved here because my mother's from New Zealand. But I arrived when I was 7, and I started playing pretty much immediately, you know, for your local club in Christchurch, in Canterbury. That's where my family's from. So that 7, or, you know, up 10 years, I suppose, of what I could call playing in the local community grassroots game with my club at the time. That was Kashmir Wanderers, which is now Kashmir Technical. I think that they've merged. What that did was at some point you committed to the sport, and you were, you know, fortunate enough to be able to play for the various provincial teams, the Canterbury sides at the time, and also New Zealand, you know, across the 17s and 20s. So playing and playing at a reasonable level, even though now, if you think about it, it's not a requirement as such, right? To be necessarily a good player, to be a good coach, nor administrator. It was helpful and enabled me to get myself overseas quite quickly. I was committed to playing professionally, and those around me, particularly national team staff, thought I was more than capable of playing professionally overseas. So I moved to England and then to the Netherlands quite quickly after that. And to try to summarize, basically, I spent 12 years in the Netherlands, going through both professional football, played professionally there for a short period of time, and in the first division, not in the top division, but what in Australasia would be classed as a reasonable level of football, and then moved on very, very quickly to amateur football. Probably the best thing that happened to me really was the shift back to top amateur football. It's highly regarded in the Netherlands, and is of a reasonable standard, but it gave me the ability to combine it with the sport academy and my ability to go through the Dutch, you know, football associations accreditations, which are, dare I say, reasonably well regarded globally as you know, our benchmark. Maybe not their benchmark, but certainly our benchmark, worth pursuing. So returning back to New Zealand, I came with you know, a whole raft of experiences over that 12-year period, both as a player and, more importantly, as a coach predominantly.
Yeah, and that's where we first connected. I remember you arriving back from your time in Holland, and I was playing, you know, local level football in Christchurch, and the head coach at the time, I think you had a connection through your playing days before you left, and you came down and you kind of worked as, you know, the assistant coach, but effectively pretty much the head coach, and kind of took that responsibility for a number of years, and then you moved into Canterbury United. So you maybe just accelerate through your time now back in New Zealand. Was coaching the main driver? Is that where you thought you might have the most impact? Was staying in, you know, as a head coach versus say the youth team coach, which you also did that role at Canterbury United Dragons as well before you moved into the administration role?
Yeah. So after a period of study, I'd actually achieved all my qualifications and considered myself, as many do in Europe, a professional football coach. It was a chosen profession to be involved in the sports industry and coaching. So when I arrived back in New Zealand and going back into the local, domestic football scene, I was a little bit shocked, a little bit disappointed maybe that the game hadn't moved on as much as I thought it maybe would have. Both from an infrastructure point of view, whether or not, coaching was actually seen as a profession. It didn't seem to be, clubs with a significant infrastructure and youth development. But ironically, when I was in Europe, youth was my, particularly working with the older teens, was probably my area I enjoyed the most and certainly kind of gravitated towards. So when I came back, I took on, the Canterbury group. I had a very good group of players with genuine potential, but far more importantly, with the right mentality and approach to the game over a period of time. And then that morphed into kind of senior football as I chose to stay in Christchurch. That was the experience with yourself at Western and then on with Coastal Spirit. The thing about that, and obviously the shift also to the Canterbury United, which at the time was a franchise and played at the top domestic level, was the fact that I was committed to the idea that as a New Zealander, even though I'd come back to New Zealand and New Zealand was somewhat isolated from the global game in many ways, we didn't necessarily need to be behind in the way that we thought about the game, nor the way we develop players or coaches, etc. And I was keen to provide my experiences. I'd been very, very fortunate to be in some very good environments, and I was just keen to share with whoever was willing to listen, and to take on board some of those experiences for their own betterment. Just to add some value to whatever teams and groups that I was involved in, and that morphed into coach education over time.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So was the coach education piece, which I know is it's your baby, right? This is what you go to bed most days.
It's become that way. It's become
that way. So did it bear out a frustration that the game hadn't moved on? Maybe the quality of players, the quality of environments, quality of coaching. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Was it the frustration element that you kind of go, okay, I can have a greater impact if I'm focusing my energy on the coach education piece, which has a trickle down effect across all layers of the game, versus you'd moved into a role of director of football at mainland football, like one of the 7 federations, kind of leading the charge in terms of impacting the game in that one space. Where did that coach education kind of decision and path kind of come from?
Yeah, I identified the fact that in New Zealand there were a number of very, very capable people who coached football, right? And were willing to devote a significant amount of time, not just because they were passionate, but because they were willing to learn. They were willing to be better than they potentially were, in the previous month or year, etc. So what that did was it kind of ignited a ethos, if you like, or a mantra of, the idea of kind of world-class thinking, world-class coaching is free. It's free in the context that you don't need to live in Europe or the States or South America necessarily to have access to some of the game, the global trends, etc. And if we were able just to maybe be somewhat more open-minded, or the coaches that were working in the game at the time or around myself were open to the idea of doing the work and investing time, we could be as good as our players could be as good as, and so could our coaches, and we could always deal with the challenges. So those two things met, and then I started to get involved more in coaching because I was willing to impart my experiences and knowledge, which I was just fortunate to have. And during the course of me shifting from coaching to coach education, I was also simultaneously, maybe that needs to happen too, where I was around some very capable people, world-class people who were also coach educators in their own right. And that kind of accelerated my idea to, to shift into that direction. It helped on both counts, because articulating a process as a coach educator also helped me as a coach.
Well, thanks for, I guess, the backstory. I want to pause on kind of the role of the mentor and the mentee,
Mm-hmm.
and then the second part predominantly around the coach education space. So
Yeah.
our code is football, but you could apply this to other codes, and you've had experiences in the similar level people for other sports within New Zealand, so you can speak for different contexts. So let's just start with, I guess, the role of the mentor. So I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you the question is, do you have a mentor?
Yes, I've had several people that I would class as being a mentor, and all of those people have added, different um, different ways of uh, thinking, different ways of operating, which have kind of forced me to either change my behavior as a person or as a coach, or as a coach educator. So yeah, very fortunate in that sense.
Do you have kind of one for coach education that you go to, one for coaching, one for athlete development, or do they kind of all serve? So just talk to me about, I guess, the difference of them in terms of your length of relationship, how often you would speak with them, as much as you want to share, of course.
Yeah, I have a mentor. I still consider him one, Jan van Eyck. That name won't necessarily mean anything to your listeners. However, a prominent coach who might have been considered somewhat alternative in the way that he approached the game, but still considered what one of the better coaches in the Netherlands, who asked the continuous question of and maybe the difference between the top and your top. He referred to the benchmark, or our benchmark, and then your benchmark, and then trying to bridge the gap between those two, both personally and also professionally. And that continuous search for improvement enabled you to take into consideration. This is the huge thing I learned from Jan, was that by reaching your top, it might incidentally mean that you reach the top, but very rarely are they the same thing. But it shouldn't stop you from pursuing that goal. So, and then probably more in the New Zealand context and linked to education, probably Rob Sherman is someone who has added significant value to the game here in New Zealand, and probably in Australia, you would argue as well. And spending time with Rob forces you to to elevate your thinking. It's very, very difficult to survive in his environment if you are not looking at and improving yourself as a coach educator, but also the way in which you communicate, both the level of empathy that you show, but also the level of knowledge and how you impart that knowledge and articulate it. It's a challenge, but both of those have been highly influential.
Yeah, Rob Sherman, previous guest on the pod, one of two, maybe three people I would class as a mentor as well. And I can see, I think I met Jan once, very, very briefly, but I can see through your explanation of what he provides you, that alternative thoughts are very much reflected in you. So I feel fortunate I have kind of my own Jan and you in terms of that abstract alternative approach, and then Rob, the more conventional through the environments and structures and things, but also a really deep thinker as well. So the role of having a mentor, is it a nice to have? Is it a must have? Like, how do you view that for, let's talking mainly now around coaches, people on their coaching journey, potentially you know, parents who have, you know, seen their other friends who might be a few years ahead of them in that sense. It doesn't limit themselves to coaches. Maybe as players, like the older player in your team who's, you know, come back from professional, and, you know, they can be a mentor as such as well. So I challenge people to think a little bit outside the box around what a mentor could be for you in your capacity. But I guess, what's your stance on having one or two mentors in your life?
Yeah. So there's been a couple of things that I've observed, right, over the years and experienced personally. I suppose the observation is, very rarely would you consider a mentor someone that's within your peer group or going through the same phase of development or education or within the same environment. It's very rare that that's the case. It's usually someone who has somewhat more experience, right? More years within the game, who's able to provide you with either it's not always a better context, but a different one, right? Which might bridge the history of the game or bridge the history of something, and it gives you a glimpse into um, a period of time, the period of time that they would have gone through, and the period of time that you're currently in. So if you, I'll pick up on the older player maybe that's within the club, and how that morphs into mentoring others, whether they're those, because they are given usually leadership responsibilities, right? Accountabilities and responsibilities lend themselves for you to delve deeper into the environment, you know, the culture, the, you know, the detail to make a team or a group of people better. Now, what that does is in some ways force that person to either contribute to the game and others, and that's usually the piece where a mentorship is 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 morphed, is developed, is established. Is that I've gone through something, I've been given responsibility and accountability to think more deeply about something, or in a role where I'm responsible to impart knowledge, and then become somewhat more it becomes somewhat more organic in that sense, because others will then look to that person for knowledge, if that
So
helps.
do you feel that a stronger likelihood of a longer term connection is formed through organic kind of relationship, or is there, you know, potentially, I can see value in this person in the distance, I'm going to go make a conscious effort to try and attach myself and be part of that person's influence?
Yeah, more the latter. Yeah, definitely more the latter. The mentee, right? The person who's in search of something, whether that be knowledge or process or information or connection, usually is in search, and they can identify either a gap in their own, whether that's character, personality, right, competencies, and are desperately trying to learn and bridge the gap or fill a potential gap in their understanding. And that's when you'll find the mentee or someone searching for a mentor is likely to connect to that person, versus the other way around. Because the other, if I was to consider a mentor, they're not consciously searching as such for people to be their mentee. That you appreciate that requires a level of humility, right? To not go in search of a mentee. It's usually the other way around. Yeah. But two things happen. One, the recognition of a gap, and two, the opportunity to share. And then a relationship and a connection is forged.
Yeah, and I think that's how ours kind of created. We, you know,
Yeah.
for a long time we were literally just coach, player,
Yep.
and that was fine. Your role is still a mentee as the coach to the athlete of trying to help me improve, but very very little conversations occurred around, coaching and player development and things like that. It wasn't until I was no longer a player in your environment that we had that space, that kind of whether you saw an opportunity and thought,
The
here's
dynamic, the dynamic changed.
yeah.
Yeah, and the best example of that is when you shifted to the performance environment within New Zealand football, and we happened to be able to spend time together, where the shift came in both accountability and responsibility. You know, it's of you appreciate it, it's the responsibility is significant when you have a player's development and a very short window to be able to affect behavior and actions and form someone or add value to their career or their path or their journey. Now, with that accountability and responsibility, it somewhat forces you then to ensure that you're equipped with the knowledge, with the with all the inter and intra kind of personal skills that you need to be able to interact with people. And that search will force you to ask those that you trust to identify, not always solve your problems, but definitely identify gaps in what you need, because now you're responsible to others and others are dependent on you. So you'll find that happens relatively quickly. And that example of you taking national groups was one where we were able to get to the context very quickly, because you appreciate what I mean, right? That time is of the essence. Literally every day or week that goes by, it has a bearing on the player's development. And you need to know what you're doing. And therefore, if you aren't able to articulate that whether that be in a process, or you're not able to solidify your belief or your value, and you're not quite sure about how you're going to behave or how you're going to act next, you're going to be in search of a mentor to help you find what you're looking for.
Or you're not, and you wing it, and it is what it is, and the bar stays the same. I think you're coming back to an earlier comment you made about why should we as a small footballing nation be behind? There's no need to be behind. Let's get the people that we feel can make influence and change and then kind of keep pushing their own bar higher in order for the game to move forward.
Yeah, so you've capped your own ceiling. Yeah, but by not engaging, by not asking the uncomfortable question, or questions that you need to ask to continuously be better, you limit yourself. You define your own ceiling, and by default, the environments that you end up working in are in some way self-selected for you. Yeah.
So I would say you are a mentor to me. Do you believe you are a mentor to others? Like, do you even know? Is it something that you take pride in, or you keep counting? Is it something that you have in the past but no longer? Like, where is that for you?
Yeah, the only thing that I would suggest that there is a small group of people, you're one of those people who have chosen consciously to develop a connection and retain that connection over a period of time to ultimately improve themselves. So that's probably what I can suggest. It's not as if how's best to articulate that. It's not.
So if there's this small group that you would kind of pull together, what I'm keen to find out is, I'm assuming we're all different in terms of our stage, possibly our sport, possibly our age and experiences.
Yes.
Do you have a kind of a uniformed approach that the three of us or whoever you kind of go in terms of touch point, regularity, types of questions, or are they quite bespoke based on me needing certain other elements, or are you waiting for me to come and see where the conversation goes and go from? How do you kind of manage, I guess, more than one mentee at a time?
Yeah. So the thing that links all of those people together is that they remain connected, and the level of connection, in other words, the touch points, the regularity and frequency of our connection is very much dependent on them, but it doesn't affect the quality nor the subject matter. The subject matter can be very different, and often you're either listening, yeah, or you're trying to add significant value or context to their their current state, if you like. So yeah, there's something which uh, the uniformity comes in the fact that group of people is constantly looking to improve themselves. That has to be the basis, and then the differences, the variance comes in the frequency, but also the subject matter, but never the quality of the conversation. Yeah, what you need to do as a mentor is to try to keep the quality of the conversation, and if you break it down into what we're talking about, it's definitions. So think deeply about the definition of what you say, or a word, or a particular subject, before you delve into the belief, before you delve into your belief and your value, and then understand the competencies, and, if you like, the knowledge that you'd need to have. So those are the three things that are, again, the commonalities, if that makes sense. Yeah.
What about kind of
Mm.
common mistakes or things that derail either a relationship between a mentor and mentee, or
Yeah.
the mentor maybe kind of guiding, or
Yeah.
what's the word, kind of forcing a particular person down a certain road, which
Yeah.
might be their own personal belief? Or what, I guess, what are the common traps to kind of look out for, and either in terms of starting somebody searching for a mentor, things that they should look for, maybe trying to avoid, or the relationships have started, here's some red flags to maybe think, well, this might not be the right mentor for you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Broadly speaking, one of the pitfalls from someone searching for a mentor, or someone that they can trust, is that they are continuously open to trend. So where they believe the game is heading. So ironically, the way to get to an authentic self is through the filtering of research, filtering of trend, and identifying what resonates with you. Those who struggle and are constantly in search of trend, constantly in search of what globally is accepted, or what someone else might think, they will always struggle. And vice versa, if you're the mentor, I've always found, I can only speak from my own point of view, if you if you come from a very fixed position, whether that's a philosophical position or a position of belief through either your past, or whether that's your playing history, or the influences that you've had, coaches that have been in your environment, and you try to establish, or try to highlight something based on a very fixed position, you often lose the person that you're trying to connect with, because it becomes more about you than it does about them. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, and that's a significant pitfall.
It's interesting. You spoke earlier around connection with education, and this is the connection piece. The education piece is, it's trying to be in service to what that connected person needs at that moment in time. If we now think about education with connection in terms of coach education, you can also look at it through a similar lens, where you're trying to impart wisdom and support to a number of people who go through a formalized coach education piece. But it's very prescribed. It's very formal. It's almost the opposite of the mentor kind of role. It's, here is the prescription. Here's how we're going to impart this education. Now go away and and develop and experience that. Do you feel internally there's some conflict between kind of those two hats that you tend to wear, or they work actually in harmony quite well?
No, again, another good question. So look, I think it's misunderstood. So formal coaching, whether that's in a course or a linear form of learning, right? I think it's misunderstood. So the idea of having a blueprint, whether that's a process or a methodology, needs to guide the time in which you are with, whether that's a candidate or someone who's come on a course or has interacted with you on a seminar or a workshop, etc. You need to have some kind of contextual piece, and that's usually either process, methodology, or the way you work. You have to be able to explain it. So it's quite transactional in that sense, but it needs to be, because you have to have a contextual model, something which you both can relate to and discuss. Now, where the game's evolved over the years, because that's more the very kind of dry, I'm the teacher, I'm the educator, you're the student, and kind of what I say must be right. I think where some education has the years is the ability to recognize intra and interpersonal skills. So the management of yourself, basically, and others. And if you, as an educator, I think because often people think, well, there's a real art to educating. I don't think it's an art at all. It's not an art form. It's a craft. Yeah, being an educator or being a coach is a craft. You can actually get better at it over time, and you need to have some kind of framework, some kind of blueprint to contextualize and have everyone talk about, whether that's training, whether that's watching a match or whatever it might be, and then acknowledge the fact that there is a significant amount of what you can talk about subjectively. So yeah, and those two things often get confused, because when you feel as if you're on the course, someone's telling you what to do, that's very much the how. So if you feel that way as a coach, as a parent starting out, or as a player who might have gone to their first coaching course, try to recognize that we're talking more about the how versus the what. And as you go through that pathway, you might find that the conversation changes, where we all acknowledge the process, we all acknowledge the methodology, and a framework in which we need to discuss something, and then the floor is very much yours, because over time, hopefully by building a portfolio, doing research, having a mentor, you're able to articulate your own ideas, but without losing neither the process nor a methodology that you can explain. So yeah, that's what intrigues me about coach education, because it's a delicate balancing act between the two things.
So if I'm a coach somewhere in my journey, could be mum or dad jumping in to help out.
Yeah, and often that's the case. Yeah,
or it could be all the way through, like I'm just starting my pro license. That's a very long journey. I guess, what is, in your opinion, two questions: how important is formalized coach education, and why? And then what other elements of improving oneself, e.g. education through other means, and what are some other really helpful ways that people can go and seek and improve through knowledge of others?
Yeah. There's some really good analogies to use when we talk about going to a course. So, if you're a young player, or you're a mum or dad going on to a course, usually that's through, you've often either been put into that position, or it's more curiosity than anything else, and you feel as if there's some type of blueprint, some type of way in which you can impart knowledge. I suppose that's the best way of explaining it. You're quite curious about coming onto a course, and that's valuable to you in the sense that outside of you thinking as if someone else is going to do the thinking for you, it's very much like coming to a driving test, right? Where there's some road rules, right? There's a stop sign, there's usually have to indicate, and, coaching courses, whether they're at the initial stages or at the latter stages, are very much about that. And you have to show evidence of some levels of competency or understanding. But over time, you'll find that they become far more subjective. They become somewhat more personalized in the fact that you've now evolved, you've read, you've done an awful lot of informal learning, which has only added more detail, more substance to who you were as a person, as a coach. So that usually changes things.
What are some of those informal opportunities and experiences that you would recommend to people to go?
Well, yeah, the forum that we're on now, usually any way where you can hear someone articulate something in a different voice or platform, that's probably the best way, and that's either through a podcast, articles, something which someone has put their name to, whether that be in writing, because what that does is once you're able to read someone else's ideas or listen to someone else's journey, you're able to determine whether it has any value to you. And that continual search, it's a relentless search for not just any knowledge, but the knowledge which is of value to you, is the journey worth pursuing, right? Because it's ongoing, and it can only enhance your practice. It can only enhance yourself as a person.
Yeah, I double down on having, cost me a coffee to go and sit with somebody and have a conversation.
Yeah, 100%.
I've gone and watched field hockey coaches deliver before, because I see some relevance in field hockey and football. It's rectangular, it's invasion sport, also netball, and kind of have these conversations with people who are also quite keen to learn from football. So I think we need to not just be very closed-minded and go, I'm in football or I'm in golf, I only go speak to golfers. Try and think of that relationship building outside of your sport as much as in your sport with that formalized education.
Listening. So something on that, Gareth, listening to others, whether that's you've chosen to take time to go to a seminar or conference or whatever that might be, or you've chosen to listen to someone else's practice, maybe a different code. The true value lies in the language. Language is key, because you will hear ways in which certain behaviors and actions are explained, which are usually unique to each code or sport. It's like code. It's like a shorthand, which is, if you're involved in the sport, you learn and you hear regularly. And if it's football, then it's, in our case, it's subliminal, it's kind of regular, it's comforting, and we hear it. But when you hear it in a different sport, those small bits of code are usually the catalyst for you to consider and think whether or not they're worth incorporating into your own practice. And it's the language which is of vital importance. So the way someone phrases something, the way they articulate something, and the words they use is fundamentally important, because it can change the way you think about your own sport, or the way you practice and how you prepare, and even as whether that be a coach or a parent or a player.
Think back to my start of my formalized coach education journey. It's probably close to 20 years ago now. And those qualifications or those courses don't exist, and they haven't for a number of years. So there's a perception that, every, 8-year cycle or 6-year cycle, a new boss comes in and throws out whatever, baby with bathwater. That's all wrong, and here's the new thing. So what's your take on the evolution, I guess, of formalized coach education? You can speak from football, you speak across other codes that you kind of know some information about. Like, is it evolving for the sake of change, or you generally believe that as education becomes deeper and more knowledgeable, and courses can become more tailored to suit, is it to suit the masses, or is it to get more impact out of the current generation? What's your thoughts on the evolution of formalized education?
Well, I'll touch on your wording. So if it was truly an evolution, there would be a recognition that certain things within, we'll just call it education, um, are constants, are relevant regardless. So an example of that would be, do we feel that it's important to plan or prepare training sessions for players?
Yes.
Well, you if you were to suggest, well, no, I'd rather we'll just see how it goes. That there's no real need for any kind of planning nor designing sessions to be able to meet, whether that be session objectives, etc. Well, then you've saved yourself a great deal of time. It's an unlikely position for you to take, right? But it's a constant which everyone agrees it would be helpful, not just to yourself, but more importantly to the player, because you're either trying to maximize their time, incorporate new learning, let them reach their individual and in our case, group outcomes if you're involved in a team sport, right? So those constants are one thing. And then there's a second part to that, which is, well, if it's an evolution, what are some other skills which coaches would need to have to be able to impart the message? Now, if you understand the idea, I've mentioned maybe interpersonal skills as something which is your relationship, not only knowing yourself, but also having a relationship with your players and understanding the psychology and the dynamic behind that. Well, some investment in time in those areas, you would suggest is also important, right? And also becomes a constant. So the evolution is, how can you continuously incorporate new research without throwing away the constants? And you'll find that only helps you improve your practice. Trust. Players end up trusting you because all you're doing then is evolving.
If you take the formalized coach education pathway in New Zealand, so let's try and make it quite narrow and focused.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what's missing? What's missing from that in terms of an education piece to help better prepare either the coaches or the players and ultimately the game improve?
So the evolution, if you like, from process, from design, from modeling, from blueprinting, in my opinion, should shift to something where you're able to articulate in your own way those processes. Now, that's sometimes touched on when you get to the higher end of the linear model, like let's say a B, an A, and maybe a pro license, where that's probably an expectation, right? That you're able to articulate your own vision and philosophy and playing model and styles. But that's the key. The key is to be able to, in some ways, articulate that well.
Here's me giving
You mentioned
some ideas.
tips for me.
Maybe it's happening. So we spoke about the what and maybe the how. I think we are good as a code at creating framework and process and structure around this is kind of how we plan and present and deliver training sessions, and components of training sessions will give you different outcomes, which is kind of the what. But the genuine what, the detail of receiving 3/4 of the pitch. So some of the technical detail behind why I need open body shape in order to be aware, in order to perceive things quicker and make a better action. I've not been on a coaching course where I have received the what. I have had to develop my library of the what through listening to better coaches than me. Quite often it's the deliverers, the leaders of those courses, model sessions on a theme and a topic. And I've been a training nubby running around executing the training session, or I've
Yes.
been listening and I've absorbed it and gone and tested in my environments and developed my knowledge base that way. So this is a question I get asked a lot through some of the coaches working here is, where did you learn that particular detail or that particular slogan or that particular, how did you,
Yeah.
where,
Yeah. Phrase, terminology. Yeah.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, to be honest, it's just accumulated over 20 years of coaching in really good environments alongside underneath better coaches than me. And I've had the foresight to kind of not just let it happen, actually go, shit, I want that, I'm going to use that, I'm going to take that. Even on coaching courses, having the ability to write these things down rather than just forget about them because they've happened. That'd be kind of my advice to the coaches I have these conversations with, is make sure you're taking everything you possibly can out of every interaction on these environments, because that's where the gold is. So coming back to the question, like the what to be coaching,
Yeah.
not how, or the framework to coach it within. Do you agree? Is that missing?
I do. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. So there's two things I've taken from what you've said there. If we talk about the formal pathway, I can relate it to New Zealand's context, is if we were to incorporate more of the what, often it's being able to bring that to life. And you can do that. Some of the times which it's happened well is if we've introduced, or not so much introduced, but intertwined some key people that come from either different walks of life or professional football coaches who are literally sharing their what and are bringing it to life both on the pitch and also in a more theoretical kind of question and answer way. That's where you can pick up the gold, the gold nuggets that you potentially are searching for. So there's definitely that for sure. The second part to that is your journey. You probably highlighted the fact that you've deliberately gone out and either watched, observed, or taken on board those things. Well, no one else is going to do that for you, unfortunately. And then it's quite self-selective, and the people who continuously go searching for those things and adding them to their portfolio are usually those who go on and reach their own potential.
I had a little bit of experience as a coach educator back in Christchurch, and it's sort of something that I really enjoyed, and something I probably could see myself doing again in the future. It also helped me become a better coach.
It does.
In terms of being able to present in front of a group, have questions thrown at you, you have to think laterally and how I would apply that to the coach. Do you see many coaches go through a coach educator pathway? And do you just said you agree, like, do you see that's an opportunity missed maybe for some of our more aspiring coaches to have this as a secondary feather in the cap, so to speak?
Yeah, there's two parts to that. In New Zealand, we've literally just developed a coach developer pathway in itself. It's quite unique. It's only very, very recent. And it gives the opportunity for coaches. They're often coaches. Sometimes they're teachers. Sometimes they come from other walks of life, to be able to pursue a different pathway in its own right, the coach educator pathway, if you like. It's definitely something to consider, regardless of whether you're a player or you're currently a parent, or you even come from a different walk of life. Usually those who are already involved in education, it's a smaller leap, and they're more likely to entertain the idea. But it certainly helps you in a number of ways. It definitely helps you as a coach, like you've highlighted, because there's nothing more, or it's extremely challenging to be able to articulate something to someone else, right? And by doing so in a way which can be universally accepted, right? Which is not tainted by subjectivity, etc. It can be delivered kind of in in quite a neutral, humble way. That's quite difficult to do. You start choosing your words very, very wisely, and what I've learned as an educator and what it helps you do is you move away from the extremities. You very rarely are starting to talk about never. You won't use the word never or don't or can't, right? You always have to find a middle ground between, you know, a subject matter where you go, you know, we never allow our players to warm up, for instance. I know that might sound like a crazy example. Well, never, or sometimes, or is it are warm-ups valuable, and if so, why? And you start asking better questions rather than providing answers. So yeah, it's an enjoyable journey if you're willing to invest the time.
What's your, I guess, final message to people, I'm not going to categorize them, that are hesitant, negative potentially, around formalized coach education structures within their chosen sports?
Look, I would encourage those to at least entertain the idea of doing something which might be uncomfortable. It's usually always a good way to, gain a react or get a reaction, for yourself as to where you think probably the right way to go. So I'd encourage you to do that for two reasons. One, it gives you the ability to say, this is actually either for me or not, right? Because not knowing is probably not ideal. And then the second part is that if you embrace and you go through the what seems to be an arduous process, but can be quite enjoyable. If you're willing to do the work, you'll accelerate your understanding, learning, and ultimately enjoyment of the game.
Right, let's move on to our quick fire questions.
Okay, yeah, no.
Provide me and the audience for one question or a question for the week for us to ponder on.
A question. Okay, that would assume that I've kind of done some homework around this, right? My question would be, are you doing everything you possibly can to reach your ceiling?
Great question.
So
outline a concept or idea that you have come across or you're thinking about at the minute.
There are yes, there are lots of ideas. I'm trying to think of a concept or idea. The one I've read recently or resonates with me is it's a quote by Christopher Hitchens, which kind of stayed with me, and it's forced me to think conceptually about things, is to take the chance to, don't know if I'm mentioning it completely right, but take the chance to think for yourself, or the opportunity to think for yourself. A great deal of reward and wisdom will come your way.
Nice.
Yeah.
A book, movie, podcast, or TV series that you would recommend for potential coaches or players or athletes?
Outside of this one.
Outside this one.
Yeah, outside of this one. I always, if you're interested in someone who will force you to think, I listen to a lot of Ricky Gervais, also because I generally think he's funny, but he's also quite contentious in many ways. That usually stimulates an awful lot of thinking about how you interact with people, and whole raft of behaviors and values. So anytime you can listen to him, not just in a comedic sense in the show context, but also in a when he's delivering a podcast or thinking. Another person worth recommending is Sam Harris. He's also a very good He's able to articulate things exceptionally well in his own field, neurology, neuroscience, the way we think.
Yeah, brilliant.
So,
Too good.
okay.
Recommendation.
Hopefully that helped. There's a couple.
If I could give you a magic wand that you can wave away and change one thing around, let's keep this narrow and go football in New Zealand. Now that could be coach education, it could be competitions.
Yeah.
You dedicated a better part of the last 25 years to football in New Zealand. What would the one thing be that you would change?
It probably has to do with access to education. If I could make it free across the board, I would.
Perfect. I think a lot of people would,
talking across the full spectrum of, whether that's a pro license or, heavily subsidized, across the board. I'm talking about both formal and informal. That's the way I'd use my magic wand. Yeah.
One piece of advice that you were given that you'd like to give us?
I think I've already mentioned it. It's the pursuit of reaching your top, right? So, and then the acute understanding that your ceiling is not necessarily the ceiling or a benchmark. So as long as you're reaching your ceiling, there may be they may be similar. The top and your top might be the same thing. It's very rarely the case, but as long as you're striving for it, you never quite know.
Great segue into the last question. What is the thing that you are striving for at the moment?
I think a little bit of balance, if I'm honest. You talked about a long period of time, that you've committed to the game, but maybe you're at a different stage in your career, in your life where, balance is important. Quality and the amount of time that I spend with and who I spend it with becomes more and more. You start reflecting on those things. So that's what I'm looking to do. Yeah, which involves mentoring and, supporting yourself on this podcast and a whole raft of other people.
Hey, Korouch, it's been a pleasure to be able to kind of have this conversation in a public type forum where other people are privy to the conversations that we kind of have. And, we didn't necessarily go too deep in one particular topic, but I felt we covered some real insights into the role of the mentor as well as being a mentee, and have the ability to do both, and as well as pairing that with the real value of both formalized structured education and sport, as well as some more informal constant learning to help ultimately improve the game, be it whatever context or whatever angle you were coming from. So I've had a great time. We could do this many more hours, but for the sake of entertainment and education in this forum, this will be a good endpoint for us. So appreciate your time.
No, I've appreciated it and enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sticking through to the end of this episode. It would mean the world to us if you could hit the like or share button so we can get these amazing insights out to other like-minded coaches, athletes, and parents. Cheers.